Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you very much to our next session of our Inseparable series on difficult issues in the Polish-Jewish relations. I'm going to switch to English for a moment now to address our English-speaking guests.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jakub Nowakowski. It is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you at the third meeting that is taking place as a part of the our discussion project, Inseparable, Difficult Issues in the Polish-Jewish Relations. The meeting will be taking place in Polish with a translation to English. So those of you that would like to hear, to participate in English, please press the icon at the bottom of your screen called Interpretation and select English. This will allow you to switch to the English channel and listen our interpreter, Mr. Adam Musiał. So once again, please switch to Interpretation and select English.
Ladies and gentlemen, the meeting will last for around an hour, maybe 75 minutes, depending on how our discussion will develop and unfold. We're happy to take questions from you, so please write them in the chat box. And if only we have time at the end of the meeting, our moderator, Ms. Kazimiera Szczuka, will try to pass them on to the panelists. This time, our third episode of our discussion will be dealing with the narrative about the righteous between silence and propaganda. Although those honored with the Medal of the Righteous among the Nations, the most numerous group are opposed, but until the 1990s or 1980s actually, the group of the righteous and the stories were not present in the public debate. This changed in the 1990s, first gradually, and then with the phenomenon of Irena Sendler, who became well known, and the righteous became more and more known, and the discourse that appeared in the 1990s recently started to lean towards a bizarre direction towards the righteous being instrumentalized. The image of the righteous as heroic figures who often acted against the surroundings is giving place, or actually has already given place, to a different narrative about the whole Polish nation being a righteous nation, who, despite the suffering and the terror and the German oppression, en masse stretch a helping hand to the Jewish neighbors. This will be discussed by Anna Bikont, a reporter and the author of a series of books, including The Crime and the Silence, Confronting the Massacre of Jews in Wartime, Jedwabne, highly well received, and she also wrote a book about Irena Sendler that she received a reward for. Professor Dariusz Libionka, a historian at the Polish Academy of Sciences, head of the academic unit of the Majdanek concentration camp museum, and a member of the Center for Holocaust Research of the Polish Academy of Sciences, the author of a series of publications, for example, the Holocaust in the General Government, and also a book on Jewish property during and after the Second World War. And last but not least, Professor Tomasz Żukowski, a historian of literature, works in the Institute of Polish Literature of the Polish Academy of Sciences and deals with the issue of the public discourse in Poland and the image of the Jew and the narrative of communism in communist Poland. A co-author of the Zagłada academic magazine. This meeting will be led by Kazimiera Szczuka. The whole series has been organized with the events foundation, Correct Foundation. Our partner is the Institute of Judaic Studies of the Jagiellonian University. Thank you. Thanks to all our partners for cooperating on this event. Before I pass the floor to Kazimierz Sztuka, let me ask the Deputy Director Tomasz Struk to introduce a few photographs, images to do with our today's subject. Thank you, Kuba. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just devote a few minutes to present a few photographs. I had a problem actually what photographs to choose today, dealing with the issue we're about to discuss today. The problem actually was due to the fact that museum, our Galician museum, the righteous are present in our narrative and have been present for since the beginning. Our first director, Chris Swartz, who died prematurely 3 years after he established the museum. And the last project that he did, a photo project that he did, was a series of portraits of the Polish righteous from the Krakow region. The museum holds ceremonies of granting the title of the righteous among the nations in our museum, and many righteous are and have always been our friends and are always present in our museum and come to meetings with groups of students from Poland and abroad, and they discuss their wartime experience with these students. And the lesson we have all drawn from these meetings is that the story, the history, was never black and white. And thinking of what photographs to choose, I had in mind those photographs that I know very well. There is photographs by Chris Swartz, or photographs of the meetings with the righteous taking place in our museum, of photographs from ceremonies of granting the title of the righteous that were taken, that were held in our museum. But I think that in the context of our topic today, I think these photographs should not be shown. And searching for what other photographs to show, I came across a whole set of photographs, images, not so much photographs, but images that show in a way how the righteous, or the subject of the righteous, functions today in the broader context, broader cultural context, visual context, and material context. Let me show you now a few such images. I hope I managed to share my screen with you. The righteous, or in the case of Polish righteous, the alternative name is the Poles rescuing Jews. The name is often overused. I couldn't escape the impression, evade the impression that these are people from such honorary medals, and you can see examples of it. These are people from post stamps that are issued have been issued by the Polish Post for a number of years now. You can see a selection of 4 stamps that I've managed to come across, the Ulma family and Sandler. So you can you can choose a post stamp with a righteous person. The righteous have been put on murals that you can see come across in many Polish citizen towns, like this big format mural from Rzeszów showing Irena Sandler, who's probably the most frequently presented visualized righteous, but also a mural like this one from Skierniewice. Here, Marian Pyziak, the righteous, is inscribed into a whole set series of heroes. You can see insurgents from 1833 and Polish Napoleon soldiers, all put together in a patriotic kind of mural. But to be honest with you, there is also a mural of Irena Sendler that's on an inner wall in the Galicia Jewish Museum that is in our museum. And next to it, which you can't see now, is Jan Karski. These murals were produced a few years ago as part of a artistic workshops that the audience took part in. These murals are often photographed by our visitors, and they attract our visitors' attention. And if you can see any visitors taking out a camera, then usually you will find such visitors taking photos of these murals in our museum. You can also see the righteous on various kinds of merchandise. You can see the names on t-shirts. We have a whole collection of t-shirts devoted to Poles saving Jews. Known to some branch called Red is Bad. For some reason, this collection doesn't feature Irena Sendler. So such images popped up in my Google search all the time. I've found more murals of the righteous than the righteous themselves in the stores. So this is, I think, the proper context for our discussion today, because all those images that I've shown to you, all these representations of the righteous, they are neither bad nor good in themselves. How we evaluate, how we judge them, it depends on the context that we see them in and the discussion that surrounds them. And I think this is what our panels will also discuss. Thank you very much. Let me pass the floor now to Mrs. Kazimierza Sztuka. Let me ask my first question to Anna Bikont. My first question to Anna Bikont is to you. And I'll read a quote to you from Michał Głowiński from his introduction, the second edition of the book by Anna Mieszkowska, The Children of Irena Sendler. And I'll explain to you what I mean. Irena Sendler, this comes from the end of the introduction by Michał Głowiński. Irena Sendlerowa is already now a symbol of heroism and devotion. And she has the potential to become a symbol of good relations, linking the Polish and the Jewish communities. So my question to you is, why did you decide to touch this good symbol, or symbol of good, of goodness? I didn't mean to touch or violate the symbol in a way. I'm dealing with the Holocaust from time to time, so I'm more interested in those who died, and less I try to deal with the current arguments, quarrels, and how the righteous are presented. So Irena Sendler was to be the leading thread in my story. I just wanted to find the children who died, and that I didn't manage to do so. So I tried to find children who survived and those who were their custodians. And so I had to select those children somehow. So I decided to choose those children that Irena Sendler saved. And quite accidentally, actually, I started to deal with the subject of Irena Sendler, and she turned out to be a fascinating subject. Before, she had been so presented in such a sweet context that I glossed over, that I realized that she was a fantastic person after all. So this book is half about her, half about the children that she saved. But no, my intention wasn't to tell the story of Irena Sendler as such. But I'm glad that I told her story. Yes, absolutely. Your book is by no means violates the fact that she was a fascinating person. It simply sort of touches upon the myth surrounding Irena Sendler. Did you, when starting your work on Irena Sendler and her biography, did you know that the alleged number of 2,500 children that she supposedly saved was impossible, was absurd? The idea of the book was to tell the story of different children that didn't survive, that survived. And at the end of the book, I was to present a chapter on Irena Sandler. From the story of the children, I knew that it was impossible for one woman to have saved 2,500 children. I knew those estimates. The Postwar estimate that maximum 5,000 children survived, and survived everywhere, in concentration camps, in the forest, in hiding, everywhere. So the idea that 2,500 children were saved by one woman, this would have mean that would have been a shame, because that would have meant that 10 such people as an assembly would have sufficed to. So no. I knew that this was completely absurd. I knew that, and I wanted to write about it, but I didn't know that all the elements of this puzzle will try to fall apart in my hands. So there's the small things that are mythical in the whole story, and that Irena Sandler was quite by chance, accidentally taken from a whole palette of phenomenal children who saved Jews. Because if people know what knew about them, then there was, for example, Jadwiga Piotrowska, a phenomenal person, a Catholic woman who was also a phenomenal person, as like Irena Sandler, but Irena Sandler doesn't really come up to those universal expectations, because when we take the image of the Polish hero, that we usually visualize them to have suffered as much as a person who suffered as much from the Nazis as from the communists in the post-war period. And Irena Sandler originally was also presented this way, that she also suffered after the war. She suffered from the communist hands, whereas it's not true, because she was a highly ranked person in the Communist Party after the war, in the Central Committee of the Communist Party. So she didn't quite fit that imagined image of the righteous. And I saw one of the murals, she was presented as carrying a child. I think she didn't transfer any child herself from the ghetto. This is not what she could be credited with. She was simply a phenomenal organizer, a very courageous person who was well organized, who was able to create a network of help. And because she's a woman, that she's not usually presented as a good manager, but the fact that she was a good-hearted person, a woman of a good heart, and that she carried children from the ghetto over the wall, which is not true. But thanks to your book, on one hand, well, let her be on that post stamp and on those murals. I see nothing wrong with it. But thanks to your book, we get some kind of reference point to get to know and to familiarize ourselves with the literature of fact, and not just wishful thinking and legend. So as for the numbers, so we come up against the issue of whether the Polish society is to imagine that Polish society during the war was pretty much preoccupied with saving Jews, and this is not so much governmental propaganda or the ruling party propaganda, but every time when someone tries to nuance the story to come closer to the truth, they can get into some kind of trouble. I mean, I especially mean the film by Agnieszka Holland, In the Darkness. We can get the impression that the Poles did their best to help, and the Jews were not quite cooperative, and those Poles simply were so good that they didn't manage to But as for the numbers, let me ask Professor Dariusz Libionka to present his view as a historian and about the article by Krzysztof Persak from the last issue of Zagłada, the Zagłada, or the Holocaust magazine, concerning the index of those repressed, drawn up by the Institute of National Remembrance. The title of the article was, it's called, "What Do We Know About the German Repressions for Help Extended to the Jews?" You, Professor, you might not know. I don't think you don't know the text because you're the editor-in-chief of the Zagłada magazine. So I think the text shows that the number of those repressed for helping Jews was maximum 600 people. What does it show? What kind of image do we get from this? How can we use this to juxtapose it with the propaganda image and the national propaganda image of the righteous? Can I speak now? Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. I know the article, I know the research very well. The research that was done by the Institute of National Remembrance and by other academic centers, because the project, the index project that you mentioned, was supervised by the Institute of National Remembrance, but other centers also took part in it. And Krzysztof Persak, the author of the article, mentions this. I reviewed the first version of this project, which was published online only. We should mention the authors of the project, Martyna Grądz-Karajak and Aleksandra Namysło from the Institute of National Remembrance, who did a lot of really good academic work. The Krzysztof Persak, who is not always a very understanding reviewer and he's a critical reviewer. And Krzysztof Persak, in his long analytical text, he mentioned that and he credited them with that. He also mentioned the negative aspects of this project. Not everything always works out, of course, and this volume of this index project should be praised, especially for the fact that the authors of the project should be praised for the fact that it was published at in very unfavorable circumstances. The departure point for the project was to discover, if not millions, perhaps, then at least tens of thousands of those who helped Jews, but not only hundreds, as it turned out eventually, but it turned out that very scrupulous, painstaking archival research show that not only tens of thousands, but not even thousands could be found, only hundreds. The authors tried to continue the research, to continue previous research that was done under communism, that is to find all those who helped Jews and were repressed for this fact. Previous research was done mostly by prosecution of the Commission against the Nazi crimes in Poland, and all those prosecutors in the past managed to find 700 names of those who were repressed for helping Jews, who were not so much repressed, but who actually died for helping Jews. However, the volume produced last year, it showed that the number is actually much smaller, that it's maybe 350 people who were murdered for helping Jews. And a series of cases that were described by the prosecutors before under communism as repressions for helping Jews. These cases were in fact some different cases. These Poles, in fact, they did die, but in different circumstances. But the direct cause of the death was not help extended to Jews, which is very interesting. the finding the findings of this research by these two authors and all the other authors who cooperated with them, the volume presents all those bias of those who are most documented, and the number of those. And Christoph Persak in his review showed that this number most probably will not change much in the future. So the number of 700 people who were repressed for helping Jews. So the previous number of 700 was not high, but it was still much higher than in fact the real number was. I did a focal research concerning the Lublin area some time ago, and I studied the 100 bios or so of those helping Jews in the Lublin area, and I wrote that 1/3 of those simply do not qualify as rescuers. That these were different cases, cases of different kinds of repression than from helping Jews. And now the research carried out by the Institute of National Remembrance, and it proved my focal point findings. Of course, not all. The volume presents people who actually died along with the Jews that they tried to hide, and some of them were granted the title of the righteous, like the Ulma family that is most well known from Markova, and there's a dozen or so of other people, but these are mostly. But these are people who are not righteous in the formal sense of the word. They're not people who were granted the title of the righteous. So in my review, I'm coming to a close. So in my review, I so did Christoph Persak. I remarked that a certain group of those repressed is missing from the research. Because the people mentioned in the volume are those people who were repressed by the Germans, but there's another group who were repressed or persecuted in one way or another by their compatriots, Polish compatriots, by Polish neighbors, or by some underground units. And this is not a small group and a marginal group. So if we speaking about oblivion and forgetting and remembering the righteous, then this group who suffered from the Polish neighbors requires restoring the memory primarily, and the people who helped Jews were endangered from various sides, mostly from the Polish neighbors. And Christoph Persak also brings this up to light. That out of 100 or so cases where you can actually pinpoint why the repressions took place, why and how the Germans had found out about those Poles hiding Jews, it was mostly through other Poles tipping the Germans off, through other Poles reporting on those Polish rescuers. So Poles here act play two roles as rescuers, but also as those acting against Jews and against the Polish neighbors. I'm currently working on the Polish underground, and I could quote a few dozen cases where armed men, Polish underground, and how they treated Poles helping Jews. And this is not marginal cases. It's not few and far between cases. But I do recommend reading Krzysztof Persak's text. It's in the open domain and in the Zagłada Żydów in our magazine. And I also recommend that you familiarize yourselves with the volume published by the Institute of National Remembrance. So the article that you're mentioning is in the same volume where the text about the National Armed Forces. We've published a few texts about the righteous, about the cult of the righteous, about the exploitation of the righteous in a way, the instrumentalization of how they are described and represented. Now, let me turn to Professor Tomasz Żukowski. We know each other very well. The famous Professor Jan Koliu Tomeczek. Your last book, Wielki Retusz, Great Retouch, how we forgot the Poles, how we forgot that Poles killed Jews. But if we had to talk about the righteous, I think it goes both ways. There is, on one hand, so there is an increase in the amount of knowledge that is more and more terrible, that this increase in knowledge sort of contributes to a counter wave of a counter reaction of, not perhaps like it happened after right after the Second World War and the anti-Semitic atmosphere of the post-war period. I think it's not happening this way, like at that time when you heard voices of Jewish lack of gratitude to the rescuers. But at the moment there is this big political ideological marketing concerning the righteous. And their omnipresence. So, Tomek, my question, let me ask it the following way. You, an academic of Polish literature, you wrote about this early post-war literature. You wrote about Naukowska, Oborowska, Naukowska, Różewicz, and Baczyński. Baczyński is still wartime poetry. How does it come out? I mean, can we, reading closely Polish literature, can we get to know, familiarize ourselves with the real image of the righteous? I think everything has been said quite early on. The problem is that the models of reception. That's what is presented straightforwardly is invisible. There is, I have the impression that the story of the righteous is one of such axes that make it possible for the machine that makes what is on the table, that makes it invisible. It's there. No one notices it. The righteous are one of such elements of this mechanism. Once Marta Witkowska, an MA student, a student of Michał Bilewicz, as social psychologist who studied Holocaust education in schools, and she found out in her research that the more you devote time to Holocaust education, the more anti-Semitic your students are. So probably the history of the righteous in Holocaust education takes up a substantial part. And although now we're experiencing an offensive, propaganda offensive about the righteous, I think that the mechanism that has been visible since the end of the war, definitely after the war. So this mechanism has not changed. There the righteous are primarily, the righteous are, it's the story of our self-image. So the Jews are not important. We Poles are important. It's not important what happens is happening to Polish minorities, to those who are excluded, but what is important is the image of the Polish majority. And although our meeting is called Silence in Propaganda, I wouldn't exaggerate the silence, because quite a lot has been talked about, right? And the most discussion actually took place during the most anti-Semitic periods. So after 1968, there is a whole lot of discussion of the righteous. After the book by Jan Tomasz Gross, The Neighbors, one of the counter reactions was a whole series of discussions of the righteous. So I think we are experiencing the mechanism of blackmailing those who want to speak about Polish violence, because in such cases the truth that is being more and more discovered so this truth is being juxtaposed with the alleged truth of Poles as the nation of the righteous. And those who are trying to use the image are called traitors, those who defile the Polish nest. And on the other hand, what is really important is that Polish Jews are also blackmailed. The threat of those who speak of Poles being aggressive towards Jews, that they are threatened with being shown as traitors of the Polish nation. This is most visible evidence by the trial that recently took place against the authors of Night Without End, Professors Grabowski and Anna. So I think that when we speak of the righteous, then we should take a close look at the historical reality. But what's really important also is to look at how the righteous are talked about and what is being done through this discussion. What is trying to be, what kind of pressure is being exerted? I think that the pressure is really strong. But what is the improper way of reading, interpreting this Polish literature that testified to a variety of attitudes, not only positive ones? What is this phenomenon about the more this Holocaust education in school, the more anti-Semitism there is? So if there was silence, if you didn't do Holocaust education at school, then you wouldn't have anti-Semitism. Then you wouldn't, as it was often said, you wouldn't provoke anti-Semitism, right? And there is no anti-Semitism, right? Because then you have nothing about Jews and their suffering at school. But what do you mean? How can this literature be read incorrectly? Let me give you an example. I think the whole thing is about self-justification. That we read a Polish literature of the Holocaust and we try only to see this part that depicts a whitewashed image, a retouched image, as I called my book, photographically retouched. A good example is look at the cover of the medallions by Naukowska. It shows barbed wire from concentration camps. We often get the impression that the Holocaust took place behind barbed wire, in places that are hidden away from sight. There was only about the Nazis who were the perpetrators and the Jews were the victims. But Naukowska's medallions, consisting of 7 or 8 short stories, chapters, and this book mostly focuses on the attitudes of this Polish population towards those who died. All these chapters, short stories, speak about Polish attitudes towards Jews. But the covers of those books are some kind of vaccination that make it difficult to see what the book is really about. So once we have self-justified ourselves, then any kind of voice, like from the historians from the Center for Cultural Research, or the voices of the witnesses or the voices of the victims, are perceived as a form of aggression. But how come you talk such heresies that Poles had any share in violence against the Jews? And another thing is that Polish literature on the Holocaust, not always but quite often, consists of a twofold message. On one hand, like in Andrzejewski's story. So we have Malecki, the main character. He's shown as an element of a certain social mechanism that the Jews are losing their social background. They're turned away from. The Jews are turned away from. No one tries to help. They are invisible and they are thus doomed. So this is the fate of Professor Lilian and of Irena Lilian. At the same time, there is the whole machinery is presented that tries to balance it in some way, that shows Irena as a spoiled in some way, who is not adapted historical woman. Malecki is presented as an innocent man who has to deal with this historical woman. When Wajda does the Great Week, based on Andrzejewski's book, that this message comes to the surface, and the whole analysis done by Andrzejewski is lost in the film. So on one hand, there is potential in the original text, but the reception through the film, through Wajda's film, makes us immune to seeing what it was really about. Let us now again in the same order, unless you want to speak in different order, but it's also okay. But my question is the following: how to give justice to the righteous? Is it possible? Well, Anna Beacon did this. You did write a book about Irena Sendler, who gives justice to her. We learned from your book nuanced truth about this phenomenal person. But in a broader sense, Sendlerova will become an icon of the righteous in our collective awareness anyway, as a figure of the mother extending her heart to allegedly 2,500 children. So my question is how to give justice to the righteous without falling for the simplified sort of scheme. Is there any shortcut to cut through this dualism that you spoke about? I have an idea. Anna Beacon says the whole problem with the righteous is that they are positioned in one role only. They are to defend Poland against the unjust who wanted to violate Poland, to beat Poland. And I think this is very base and unfair, and the intentions are really bad sometimes. But my dream is to have a different list of the righteous or rescuers. So I understand that the Yad Vashem wanted to honor non-Jews who saved Jews, because the experience of the diaspora is that they needed some favorable people to help them survive. But there's no reason why, being Polish, French, Belgian, etc., why to speak about Poles, Frenchmen, or Belgians who saved, because who saved was not representatives of the nation, but individuals. And those individuals could not save the image of Poland during the war. But what they can do, those who save Jews, is to save humanity a bit, to show us as humans from a better side. We are a very terrible species, and they move beyond that bad image. And I think we could try to create a list in Poland. I suggested it to the Polin Museum, but they didn't take me seriously. But I think this would be a good initiative to draw up a list of those who saved, where they would be together: Poles, Jews, Germans, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and there would be it wouldn't matter whether they were Polish or Jewish or Ukrainian or German. It would matter whether they were people who moved beyond, above the unimaginable. And this would detach us from the nationalistic pulp. But this is unrealistic, I think, because you could immediately ask why should we praise Germans or Ukrainians in the Polin Museum? Let the Germans or Ukrainians do it on their own, because they saved Polish Jews, Poles of Jewish origin who were Polish citizens. Well, perhaps not Polin, perhaps some other independent institution, maybe the Center for Holocaust Research. I'm turning to Professor Libionka. But I think this would be a way to divert the narrative, move it away from the nationalist context, to take the righteous from the national context, right? Let me ask both other professors to speak. I have an idea, if Darek Libionka doesn't mind. I think we have there's a good way about the righteous. The film Pokłosie, The Aftermath by Pasikowski, the film by Pasikowski. It's about getting the truth to the surface, but commemorating also the memory, and you have to go against the community. And the film shows how the main characters go against the community. We have to do something against the main group. There's a good dialogue between Kalina, the main character, and an elderly woman, the wife of one of the murderers. Do you remember how I stole rabbits from you? I remember, she answers. So this is the main motivation. Then we have the whole story of how the two men, in a dramatic way, go against the main group. And it all ends that we are deprived of our constitutive national elements. The final crucifixion scene is to show that the group that was to identify with the romantic symbols of Poland as Christ, as the Messiah of the nations, that this is how we should do it. This is what Anna Bikon did, actually, but this is confrontational. It's an offensive against the majority group. But looking what is taking place outside the window, I think there's no other way. Well, Dariusz Libionka, Anya Bikon didn't mention this, so let me say it. The book on Jedwabne, one of the main characters was Antonina Wyrzykowska, a righteous person, and you could see, and Anya described it very well, you could see the whole problem with of the righteous, that she was a person who was ostracized, she was persecuted, she was other, different than the majority of the town, of the time of the occupation and the majority of the post-war time. She's an outsider. The righteous are outsiders. Those who helped others were outsiders, because they'd not always help Jews, but often they're Jews, and so those who help somehow stand out. When I was writing my text on the Miechów region, on the that I spoke about before, those who help and those who are indifferent come from the same social milieu. There's not much difference between them. The same level of education, the same affluence, but they somehow act differently. When you take a closer look, it turns out that those who help, after all, they are somehow different from the rest of the group. But coming back to the question, what to do? Quite a lot has happened by now, and Tomasz Żukowski said that there's this tension about the righteous getting wound up that erupt at critical moments, like the Kielce program, for example. And so a whole series of negations, and the strategies are the same. This anti-Semitic violence is often surrounded by stories of Poles rescuing Jews, like the primate Holland, Archbishop Holland said, I think in the Tygodnik Powszechny, the weekly, he said that without Poles, no Jew would have survived. How do you argue with such argument? And calling upon Jews to say openly that, wanting them to say that Poles are not murderers, and asking them to say this after the Kielce pogrom, and the same after Jan Tomasz Gross's neighbors. Under communism, things were a bit simpler because there was censorship, and the censorship simply cut out whole discourses in Poland, whereas abroad, Polish émigrés also wrote in a certain way. They did write about certain things, but they didn't write about other things because they didn't want to. They didn't want to give reasons to criticize Poland to the third parties, whether it was the West, whether it was the Soviets. To all those who could present what was perceived as a distorted version of the Polish image. And Jan Gross, who published his text in 1986, Jan Gross did this he published his text in 1986, first of his text in Samizdat edition, but otherwise there was silence. That nothing about the memoir was formatted in a way, and paradoxically, in 1989, this format continued. Irena Sendler appeared in the 1990s, and what Anya Dikon did with her book about Irena Sendler was a phenomenal thing, that she tried to nuance the story, but fortunately, she did write about Sendlerova, because the cult that grew around Sendlerova, all the actions around her, this was unbelievable. I always quote research that was carried out by the nascent Museum of the Second World War in Gdańsk, and then Irena Sendler came forth among the Poles that we are most proud of. Under Sikorski, Kolbe, she was ahead of all the leaders of the Polish Home Army, not to mention any other generals and heroes, military heroes. This all was a result of strategists at work. But let me, well, Tomek Żukowski said, well, you said there was silence. The meeting, so the title of our meeting is, after all, well presented, From Silence to Propaganda. But Tomek Żukowski, Tomek, you said that there was no silence, that it's enough to read a Polish canon classic of Polish post-war literature, and there's that show that there wasn't silence, that perhaps these things remain invisible, but let me put it aside and let me and I'd like to move on to the questions from the audience, because there's quite a lot of interesting questions, and the audience react to our discussion. There's a lot of questions. So this question, my question is about two other symbols than Sendlerova, Pilecki and Karski. Which of them is going to win the competition for the most righteous? What do you think? I think that Pilecki, after all, I think he's winning at the moment. I don't know what's going to happen. Well, I think the Ulma family are winning. That were not mentioned in the question, but in my research, Sendlerova won over Karski and Pilecki. It was only the year devoted by the Polish Parliament to Karski that made him a permanent figure in the Polish collective memory. But the mechanism was the same, like with Irena Sendler. Irena Sendler was said to be a person who saved 2,500 persons. Jan Karski supposedly tried to bring to the world the news about the Holocaust and met President Roosevelt, and so on and so forth. It's the same kind of story, the same kind of narrative. I would point your attention to the fact to the fact that Irena Sendler ranks lower, below Kolbe. This is Kolbe. Kolbe shows some disfaction that not only Jews died through the chimneys, but Polish saints also. When you go to Lichen, to the shrine in Lichen, you can see a mural with the chimneys, and you can see Kolbe above the chimneys. It shows that Kolbe is the Polish priest is is a victim of genocide, and Irena Sendler is the other side of the same story. That is, we are victims of the genocide. And additionally, we also helped Jews. So I think in order to understand how this works, you have to take everything together. That is, Kolbe and Irena Sendler. Irena Sendler, in this hagiographic rendition of her biography, she seems to be a Virgin Mary kind of figure, like the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus. But that's another question. One of the person from the audience said that Sendler is quite often called a female Schindler. Have any of you tried to study the phenomenon of help by comparing saving Jews with saving Soviet escapees from camps? In a certain sense, the situation was comparable, but paradoxically, the Soviets were quite more similar to Poles, and those who were murdered for helping Soviets were, I think, more than 600. Well, I don't know any text that would compare the two groups. I would gladly read it and publish it. Of course, this would require very meticulous research, because you would have to delve into different kinds of sources. But the problem does exist. That is, in terms of numbers, as for the Soviet prisoners of war, quite often for helping Soviet prisoners of war, whole villages were murdered on the spot. So in a way, sometimes even more brutal than for hiding Jews. But it's difficult to discuss findings of research that has not been carried out yet. But I think it's a good direction. I'm sure there are historians that would be able to write such a text. Let me also ask you about the text. But Deckel, Magdalena, Gavin, and I, as Joanna Ficus phrased it. But I'll postpone this question because we have 3 more questions from the audience. Proposal by Tomasz Żukowski to counteract the majority seems a bit idealistic and deprived of tools to act at present. How to react against the propaganda of the pedagogy of Proud. The chapel at Father Riddick's chapel does have Kolbe in the stained glass window. The attitude of the underground towards the Soviet Unions, I think I've written a text or 2. True, Adam Puławski did write about it, but not on the subject that we've discussed. Katarzyna Zachęta from the audience writes that Kolbe also features in the Pantheon of Westminster Abbey in London. Well, let me ask about the article by Professor Deckel. I don't know if you know it, but perhaps you do. An Israeli academic who, Tomek, do you know it? I look at what came up in the TVP Google search and concerning the article about Professor Deckel, what came up says no one does more for anti-Semitism than Gazeta Wyborcza and people from the circle of the Center for Holocaust Research. How to comment on this, Professor Libionka says. Tomek, you're right. How not to try and confront the propaganda? So what to do with such problematic criteria of like the shame criteria of recognizing the righteous? Is it at all possible to handle this problem? Who should we worship from among those that risked their lives and helped? If we know about them. Piotr Prawutsky writes from the audience, what do you think about the project called by name, a project by Pilecki Institute? It's a project promoted by Minister Magdalena Gawin. The project seems to show they only shows a history of help given to Jews by members of the Catholic Church. This situation seemed to be poorly documented. The Yad Vashem criteria, that's another comment from the audience, seem to have been very clear from the very beginning. It's only, my question is, have the Yad Vashem criteria been clear from the very beginning? Yes, and that Bitcoin says, yes, they were always very clear. You needed 2 witnesses. Sometimes you couldn't find them, but yes, and the saving was honored if hiding was done not for money. So Yad Vashem decided there's quite a lot of documents that prove things that are not true. When I was working on my book, the case that Mr. Levin actually issued 2 testimonies that he was hid because he had money, because the saviors were given gold and diamonds. So he placed one testimony to the Yad Vashem historical department and another one to the Righteous Award department, that he was hid without money. I think what should have been done is to leave it up to those saved to decide whether they consider those who hid them as righteous or not, even if they had to pay money. And I think inadvertently, Yad Vashem contributed to the narrative. Because you remember Karski wrote about a footpath that links the Germans and the Poles, the path of anti-Semitism, the footpath that links the Poles and the Germans. The Poles don't want to speak that they hid for money, and Jews don't want to speak about being hidden for money, because that meant that other were short of money and could not be hidden. So it's easier to say that we were hidden without any money involved. But in many cases, after all, these were sort of mercantile situations, which doesn't mean that those who hid didn't risk their lives and that they shouldn't be awarded the title of the righteous. But the whole narrative, whenever you look, it's Well, I agree. I liked what Anya said, that what she said about the footpath, that both sides want to negate something for different reasons. And I agree that the evaluation criteria are very restrictive, and there's nothing we can do about this. Now, what does it mean? What's financial profit? I mean, money was necessary for people to eat and to bribe blackmailers. What is meant probably is extra money. Of course, money that was needed to provide for those in hiding, that doesn't count. There were clear differences. If someone rented an apartment pretending to be non-Jewish, then say paid 120, and if they rented a flat as Jews, then the price was much higher. So the difference was clear. But I'm talking about a situation where people hid Jews for quite a long time, and they often had to face practical problems. The fact they needed money for the hiding process to go on. No. This is not the situation that I meant. No, this doesn't count as hiding for profit. But in this way, not everybody was entitled to even try to attempt to be hidden, to be hidden by Pose, Derek. Am I right? Yes. But still, what Anya says is there is a clear difference of taking profit. Let me give an example. Before the German court in Lviv, as a man was tried who was arrested for selling a can card, an ID to a Jew, and it was worth a few dozen thousand zloty at the time. When it was sold for 1,000 at the time, it was quite a lot, and he sold it for a few dozen thousand, and he was, of course, sentenced. He could, in theory, be considered a repressed person for helping Jews. And when I was a reviewer of the text, and I remarked that he couldn't. Quite often, you give names of people who were repressed, and this man was sentenced to death penalty. And I decided that his name couldn't be left on the list of those who were repressed for helping Jews, because there were other people, like a woman, for example, who helped a few Jews without any money at all. You can't compare those two cases. These are completely two different phenomena. They have to be judged differently. Of course, you can do it in a book. You can attach footnotes, add footnotes, but on a monument, when you put those two names next to each other on a monument, I think this is unjustifiable, and this is a problem. So when it comes to commemorating the righteous, this is a problem. So we come across quite a lot of difficulties and doubts. Now, concerning the criteria and the Polish project we spoke about before, there's nothing we can do but to there are, even in the project by the Institute of National Amendments, there are some procedures trying to verify the different cases. And I think that the other project called by name by the Pilecki Institute, I think that they should also be done this way. I mean, you can't publish anything you want. I hope there are historians who know what to do and how to do it, hopefully, and I hope they will stick to certain the right verification procedures, where they will try to verify every name. I hope if they want to remain an academic institution, I don't think that, hopefully they won't write everything they want. I don't want to be judgmental about something that that I haven't read yet. I haven't seen it before the project actually has been implemented. So, well, there is a certain problem. I think the problem of, well, let's take the case of Władysław Bartoszewski. It's 1968, 1967, and he collected testimonies of Poles helping Jews, and he collects various testimonies. There is a statement by Professor Jedlicki. We couldn't see the whole image, but the introduction by Bartoszewski, I don't think that the readers of the book, I don't think that the readers actually moved beyond the introduction, but the introduction simply shows a self-image of Poles, and it retains all the taboo. And Bartoszewski functions as an authority, as a moral authority. And the book, he's from my homeland. This book is valued, but in our environment, those who consider Bartoszewski an authority, there's no willingness to stop and think about what is going on in the book, what the similarities are between what happened, what Bartoszewski is doing on the eve of 1968, and the introduction features quite a lot of unpleasant things, like allusions to Jewish ingratitude, that Jews wouldn't have managed to put up resistance without Polish help, that the Polish side initiated the Jewish resistance. So if you take and juxtapose the different types of narratives, then this narrative doesn't really, it's not much different than the narratives that are openly anti-Semitic. Well, what can I do? Well, I've read the book, and the problem isn't outside, like someone said. How can we counteract the external offensive of the right wing? No, the problem is what is going on in the center. We should think how the center builds its narrative about Poland. We have to remember that the National Day of the Cursed Soldier wasn't started by the right wing. It was started by President Komorowski, the previous president. So we should think really what is going on in the liberal story of Poles about themselves. So when we start from how we talk about ourselves and move to the righteous from here, from this central story. So what is really primary is how we define the Polish identity. This is the problem. This is where the story of the narratives begins and where it has its origin. Well, you have access to the chat. Please have a look at the questions and comments. I don't think, Tomek, if this is the thing. Perhaps it is, but on the other hand, the problem of Jews who were absent. The struggle is about Poles trying to understand themselves better and to understand this centrist, as you said, image of themselves, and to revalue its image and verify its image. And still there are no Jews in this image. Our audience, people in the audience, like Alina Molisak is writing that Darush Kari knows that you can write what you want even today. This was the comment. And then another comment. if the Yad So some people say that they don't agree with the Yad Vashem criteria, that they are too strict, and others say that they are not too strict. Krzysztof Bielewski says, certainly some of the righteous have the awareness of being instrumentalized in the historical policy. Do you remember them ever speaking out in publicly, that is condemning such behavior publicly? Oh, the so-called Ładoś lists. What are the Ładoś lists? Lists of Ładoś. I think was absent then at school. What are those lists? Don't you know? I know, but let's not get distracted. Was he good or bad? Of course he was good. So he protested against the manipulation. He was a Polish diplomat who acted in Switzerland. He contributed to saving a certain number of Jews. It's still being discussed whether what he did was actions of the Polish state, or to what extent it was organized by the Polish state, and to what extent it was his individual actions, his and a few other people's, and how many Jews, thanks to these actions, were saved. To cut it short. But perhaps we should speak about Bartszewski. I'd like to argue with Tomek. When you read the text written in the mid-1960s, then you do see what is not there. What I found surprising in Bartszewski is that he, a dozen years or so, wrote in a much more hagiographic text in Samizdat, in the underground publication. Martyna Grącka-Rejak wrote a book about Holocaust issues written about in the underground market, in the Samizdat market. And I realized that his later texts are different than the original text written in the 1960s. The text written from 1976 onwards. So I found that surprising, that Bartszewski's his whole activity is, he's not alone. He's in a constellation of other Poles, a few Poles. It's one of the few Poles that exists internationally. He exists in Israel, in the Polish circles, in Paris, in London. He's a kind of courier with the outside world, but he also creates certain actions, activities. I'm smiling at Anya because there's Bartszewski's biography is waiting to be written with this component of his both wartime and post-war history, a parallel to Irena Sendler, but different, because he's one of the people from the Żegota comes to help Jews that was persecuted by the communists in the post-war period. So this is a subject. I think there are good materials in the archives of the Institute of National Remembrance. I've read the files of Bartszewski, of how Bartszewski was interrogated. It's very interesting reading, so I can only try and encourage you to take this up and to write perhaps a collective biography of the Żegota, Warsaw branch of the Żegota Council to help Jews. These are very interesting stories, and quite a lot of interesting things can come out of it. We can learn quite a lot from this. What we know about Żegota we know about Jakarta. It's sort of it fits the it fits the reality very poorly, and someone from the audience wrote that Pani Kashimira has problems reading. Might be because of your glasses. Where is the Ulma Museum of Markova in the current official narrative? Is this museum taken as a serious institution, or is it a product of the? Is it a product of the propaganda of national image? Where is the Ulma museum in the official propaganda? Is it propaganda or is it a serious museum? It's a question for Darek, I think. Yes, I've written a text about it, a text with Jan Grabowski a few years ago. I don't know what is going on in the Ulma Museum. Actions are being taken, or have been some educational activities that I don't want to judge because I don't know them. Our project was, and this was clear, visible from the very beginning, there was a political project, both locally, by local politicians and central national politicians. And it was also, again, it was, this project was created many, many years ago before the current government. It's difficult to be quite unambiguous. I was quite unambiguous in the past, but and I've grown a bit more milder to that, and I try to see some positives in the various actions. I think there is some space for serious discussion in the Ulma Museum. Because the story of the Ulma family really is quite moving. How this what it is wrapped up in, it's a different story, and in our last issue of the Zaguada magazine, there is a text on the cult of the Ulma family. How their story is or happens to be instrumentalized, exploited. But I don't think it has to be this way. Perhaps someday it'll be possible to talk about it in a more constructive way. I think we're running out of time, but let me share one remark with you. A while ago, I was thinking about Bartoszewski and what you, Tomek, said. I think, yes, there is a difference between his position and his diplomatic activity and him creating a vision or ways of thinking. The difference between him and Jan Karski, perhaps it'll be terrible what I'm going to say, but I think there is something that Karski sort of moved over to the Jewish side, and the Polish Catholic Polish diaspora in America didn't come to his funeral. I don't know. It might be terrible what I'm saying, but whoever wants to, in a certain way, neutral, someone who wants to create a kind of centrist discourse, they can be subjected to some kind of deconstruction. perhaps it's not worth dealing with this, and so perhaps we shouldn't delude ourselves that after, although Darek, you say you're trying to be hopeful about the new initiatives and saying that there are, after all, educated people in these institutions. Whether it's true, I don't know. So perhaps we should leave those honorable figures in peace, and not to deconstruct them, but try to think what to do in order to think what to pass on to school students through education. I've been following the offensive of the Berlin branch of the Polielsky Institute, and they claim, for example, the good Jews were those who died because you can claim that they were Polish citizens and they be counted into the Polish number of victims. This is what the head of the branch said in an interview for Der Spiegel. The book that Darek Lionka mentioned about the image of the Holocaust in the Polish underground, there is a passage when Bartszewski says about Karski, and he says that Karski is going crazy about those Jews, and he's going to defile Poland again, says Bartoszewski of Karski. So look, so there is a difference between Bartoszewski and Karski. This is the difference. So the question is, where is the center? Where do we have the center? So if we saying that Bartoszewski is centrist, so thank you very much for that kind of centrist. So let's find some other kind of center, because the center, the Bartoszewski kind of center, is located very much to the right. I would like to have a more centrist center. So we have to work it out intellectually ourselves. We have to think how to formulate our thinking of Poland and of ourselves and the Jews to have the center in the center, actually. And I think Karski is not doing anything else than treating Jews as co-citizens, co-patriots. What if we are Jews ourselves? Kasia Chmielewska from the audience now. She's writing about what you were discussing, Tomek and Darek. I think our time is up, and we have to say goodbye. What are our conclusions? Just one sentence from each of you. My conclusion is that we have to do what we've been doing. So there is this Pilecki Institute, the Ulma Museum, this and that. I'm much more pessimistic than Darek Lubionka, what this all means. But well, it is as it is. The times are as they are. We have to do our thing. We have to do our job, and what the Center for Course Research is doing, and whatever school curriculum is going to include, what the center is doing is priceless. And perhaps the school curriculum is not that important after all. We can see it, for example, through religion classes. We have to do our job, work hard, and that's it. Darek, I flipped through, I refreshed a text I wrote in 2008 concerning Polish publications about help to Jews, and I finish it with a conclusion. With the conclusion that unfortunately there's no possibility of continuing independent academic research. Well, academic research has no translation into education activities, sadly. How to break the wave of radio and TV messages. There are certain groups that will never reach. I've seen it in my family, and some family who are simply addicted to certain media. There was no way to reach them. They were just reiterating messages heard from the media, and they condemned me, even though they knew me personally. But as for stopping independent academic research, it might be difficult. You can see what's happening to the Polish Academy of Sciences and to financing the world of academia. It's not going to be easy, but the research will be carried on in this way or another, and it'll be interesting. The research will be interesting, but I'm trying to find something positive, and the positive good thing about the Ulma Museum on the Polish Day of the Righteous is that the righteous and the families of the righteous perhaps function better in our reality. You might not remember Paweł Reszka wrote a text in 2006, The Fear of the Righteous. It was a text about a few families who were to be given the title of the righteous among the nations, and they categorically relatives of the righteous, descendants of the righteous, they didn't want to make it public, because this would mean being ostracized, being facing unpleasant situations in their own environment. A similar situation happened in Markowa in the early 21st century. The title of the righteous was presented to one family, and to a local family, and the local family who was photographed at the time, and they had to face hate language, unpleasant behavior from the neighbors. So when the state despite instrumentalizing the fact, does try to show that the attitude of the righteous was positive. I remember being in a conference in Krakow a dozen years or so, done by the Institute of Strategic Studies. A woman from Dobczyce, south of Krakow, came to me. And she showed me about how she was criticized by her neighbors for what she did. So perhaps after all, this field propaganda about the righteous is changing something for the better. I don't know. I remember that not so long ago, I think last winter or autumn, we were talking about with Mirka, a friend, in the center of Warsaw. Mirka, my daughter, and the women's strikes. Myślę, czuję, zdecyduję. I think, I feel, I decide. This shows the change in how tradition is perceived, and these people who are protesting are going to change what we cannot change. I believe, and this is going to happen soon. Let us finish with this optimistic remark. Let me thank you, all of you. Let me thank the Jewish Museum, the Galicia Jewish Museum. Our thanks should be extended also to the museum. Yet another place sorry, I cannot deal with the chat box anymore. It's time to say goodbye. Thank you. Our discussion has lasted longer than it should have, but thank you very much. Goodbye.